Welcome to this week's episode of The Final Mile, where we answer your Q&A. All the questions you guys email us, put out on our Facebook group, send us directly, try to pull them all together and answer a few of them every week. So let's dig in and look at the first question. What's our first question, Stephen?
First question is brokers. Any info on sourcing export and domestic rail freight?
You got any thoughts on this one?
For me, if you're looking at exports specifically, I'd be one to talk to freight forwarders because they're the ones that are going to be handling the import-export business, and they're not doing domestic freight, so they're going to need either on behalf of the customers or they'll get you in touch with those customers that are arranging that transport either to the ports or away from the ports.
Yeah, both. Like domestic, the difference between domestic and export rail is they're typically in different container types, meaning like domestic usually ship in 53-foot rail containers and international are typically 20s or 40s. There is a company I just met with last week that has large, huge amounts of information. It's a team that used to work at Freight Flexport, sorry. And this company has all of the import data. So basically, you can find who's importing what, who the freight forwarder is, and use this for prospecting. It's a really good piece of software, and I am trying to find it right now to share with everyone. It is, why can't I find it? Revenue Vessel, that's the name of it. So really cool tool. Again, it's got like this massive amount of information. Like every shipment that comes in as an import has a record, and basically those records have who the freight forwarder on record is, who the customs broker is. So if you wanted to prospect freight forwarders, you could see a lot of that information to reach out to them to help them source capacity. On the domestic side, honestly, you can source the carriers through like Loop, which is Union Pacific's platform, which is a co-brokerage basically that access Union Pacific's railroad. And then Ship CSX is CSX's. You can get set up with those and you can book loads on rail domestically easily. You go on their platform, put in the details, it gives you the price. Sourcing the freight, I mean, you can put anything on a domestic rail as long as your customer is okay with it. So the platform will send the truck, pick it up, put it on a rail, send another truck on the other end and take it to your customer. And it used to be a big difference in time. Like if you ship Jersey to California, that's 5-day transit with a truck. It used to be like 7 to 10 days on rail. They've gotten so much better. Like I've looked at lanes that are actually faster on a train than actually in truckload in some cases. So the time frames are pretty comparable. The rates are typically cheaper, and any company you can ship domestic rail on if the customer's okay with it. And the larger customers, almost always some percentage of their freight is already on rail. So like that's a really big bucket. And then if you're looking for exports, again, I would go to the freight forwarding side. That's going to get you a pretty good idea of who's handling the import and the export, because usually they're the ones that arrange the transportation and actually tender those loads.
Right.
What's next?
Uh, Next question. We have a customer looking to move hay from Canada to the US. As a freight broker, am I able to do the customs paperwork to get the product across the border, or do I or the customer need to contact a customs broker or freight forwarder to get this done?
Okay, so Canada and Mexico don't require a freight forwarder, but they do require a customs broker. And as a freight broker, we don't handle the customs paperwork, the shipper does, the beneficial cargo owner. So your shipper would need to contact a customs broker to get the customs paperwork. And then as a freight broker, all we do is we're in contact with the customs broker and we connect them with the carrier, who then gets the paperwork to take it across the border. So from our point of view, it's pretty simple. You really just, if your shipper has never done this, you would just look up some customs brokers and give them a referral. They can handle the paperwork to go from Mexico to the US, vice versa, or into Canada. If you're going to go to do anything international outside of those two countries, then you're going to use a freight forwarder or an NVOCC.
Gotcha. Let's see. Last question. When a carrier cancels a load, even right after they booked it without picking it up, what are the consequences and repercussions for the brokers and the carriers?
Here's a rhetorical question I'll put out there to anyone that's asked this. As a broker, if you get a load for a shipper and you cancel because you can't get a truck for the right rate or a truck at all, does anything happen to you?
Yeah, you don't get to work with that customer.
Right. But is there a fee, a penalty, or a slap on the wrist? No, you just lose their trust and they don't work with you again, right?
Right.
It's the same thing with a trucking company, right? Like they agree to do it, they're going to book a load with you. If they can't make it, or if their truck breaks down or they get stuck at their last load, like you can't find them. Like they didn't start working with you yet anyway. So the answer is like nothing happens. It's incredibly frustrating because if you book a load with a carrier, though, and your customer cancels the load on you, you owe the truck a truck order not used. But in those scenarios, the truck usually is working for you. Like they're driving to your shipper. They're spending money. They're spending time. They're spending gas and effort. And they're not going to pick up a load somewhere else. So that's why you owe them money. But that's why nothing happens if they cancel on you.
Right. Yeah, and it's a conversation that happens a lot online, and you see the brokers in the comment section. Well, if you cancel on me, then I can't get any money for it. And it's a perspective thing. It's like, well, I hired you to do a job. They didn't hire you to do a job. So there's
correct. Yeah.
And for any broker out there, like you got to make sure that your contract with your shipper, like that is outlined. Your accessorials should be outlined. So there's usually a time frame. It's 24 hours, or have they started moving in it? Like you need a way to measure it so that if that does happen, the shipper says, "Oh, this load's canceled," you don't have to have that argument of, "Well, you canceled at 10 hours, and the driver was already on his way there, so we owe a tonu." And then you can avoid that conversation if it's written on paper and both people have signed it. And you know what the guidelines are, and you can tell the carrier, hey, these are the guidelines. And that hour-long conversation never has to happen.
Correct. And I think this is one of the overlooked things that really needs to happen. Like you should be talking to your customers about this ahead of time. Like you should ask them like, hey, in the off chance that you guys have an order you send to me and I'm working on, and for whatever reason, like your customer cancels it, how do you guys handle truck orders not used? Do you have a time frame? Like, how does that look? Because again, if you ask this question before it happens, like now you're just being proactive. It shows you pay attention to details, and it shows you're trying to solve problems before they happen, which are all good impressions to give to your customer, right? Mm-hmm. When you call a customer after a load's canceled, like sometimes they're already frustrated. Then you're going to go like, hey, I need this truck order not used. And they're already in the mindset where they're irritated. So now it's like confrontational sometimes. But if you ask this up front, you just go like, hey, do you guys have anything? When I'm onboarding with any shipper, I'm always asking this. Like, what is the cancellation policy? How do you handle truck orders not used? Another good segue. How do you handle detention? How do you handle layovers? Because every shipper and receiver handles them a little bit different, right? What is the cutoff between detention and a layover, right? Some companies will pay 4 hours of detention and then it becomes a layover. Some will pay you all day and then it becomes a layover. And they're all different, right? So when to the original point of like, how do you handle the carrier? You want to be able to handle the carrier clearly and upfront in the same way your shipper is doing business with you. So there is no contradiction, right? And carriers should be able to know this upfront. I advise this to all the trucking companies I work with too. Like you got to ask your dispatchers when they're negotiating a rate to ask these questions. What's your detention policy? What's layover? How do you guys handle truck orders not used? What documentation do you need, right? Because when you ask that up front and it's clear and in writing, there is no conflict after, right? Now that carrier can request it exactly the way it was asked and have it in writing. Same thing for the broker and the shipper, right? If I've got this document from my shipper, I have a file with every one of my customers. Actually, to our last episode, it's in my TMS. These are the procedures. These are their policies. This what needs to be done when and where. Now there is no discrepancy. Like I worked with this company last year that onboarded a pretty big shipper that worked with even larger shippers, right? Food company, very well known, also delivers a lot to every major grocery store. They would be on top of this brokerage and going, we need the detention check-in and check-out time signed. The brokerage is sending it to them and going, okay, well, like we got to pay this driver detention. And then they just wouldn't respond to emails. Then the manager calls the customer like, hey, I got like 6 detention requests for carriers that are like 6 hours, right? Like these are not small bills, like $300 here, $400 here, $300 here. And then they just didn't answer. And then finally, the owner of the brokerage gets on the phone with like the senior person at their customer and like, oh, like we don't pay detention. And he's like, well, if you don't pay detention, shouldn't they? And then they said this, they go, well, you should just quote more on your lanes. And then he was like, well, I would have had you told me you don't pay detention, but you intentionally misled me. And then you tell me after the fact, because like 2 out of 3 loads ran into detention. It wasn't like a one-off thing. Like clearly they dealt with this a lot, right? And in the food world, like that's pretty common. So not only did they intentionally mislead him, didn't tell him, then told, and their rates were locked in for 3 months. So it wasn't like just the next week's loads they could quote differently. So now they're in a terrible position. On top of that, they got to pay the carriers because they can't stiff the carriers just because the customer stiffed them. But the funniest or the most ironic part was they were making them send in the check-in and check-out times for detention at the receivers. Why do you think that's the case? Because
they were charging the receiver.
They were charging their customers detention and then just not paying their brokers they worked with intentionally just to make money off it, right? So like there are definitely some underhanded shady things that can happen in this industry if you aren't clear and concise when you're understanding what are the terms of working with this customer. And again, same thing with the carriers. Carriers should be asking this of brokers and the shippers they work with, right? And we absolutely have a responsibility to know these things to hire a carrier on behalf of this shipper, which is really our job.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that even before I took over the brokerage here, is I had already generated a sheet that was a list of accessorial charges, and it's official. It's got our letterhead on it and everything. Because they're, especially like when you're talking to these smaller companies, which is kind of like the target demo for a freight broker, like the whales are hard to get into. The smaller ones don't have enough freight. So these medium-sized ones, typically they're not going to have like an accessorial list, right?
They don't. You have to ask.
Right. And for the ones that don't, they really appreciate it when you just send them an official thing, and then you can sign it, they can sign it, and then we both have it on record, and this is what it is, and then that goes into their customer file, and you don't have to worry about it. And some of them are going to push back, and you're going to have to change things, but whatever.
And that's okay, but you should outline all the terms of what it's like to work with somebody, right? Like that's all that really is. Like you don't have to overthink it. Like, hey, if this happens, what do we do? What do you want to do? This is what we typically do. Do you need to do something different? All right, well, let me know. Because then, like, at least you can be clear with the carriers you're hiring, right? All the problems and conflict come because somebody didn't understand, right? What they were signing up for or working for, right? Like, in that scenario, like, didn't understand they weren't getting attention because they lied to them, right? But even so, I made the case that, like, they should have known that up front and it was their responsibility to ask that. And if the customer won't tell you, that should throw up a red flag. Like, they answered every question in your email except the one about detention, like there's probably a reason for that, right? Like maybe clarify this before you start running freight, because once you've done it, like
right. And that goes back to the last episode that we talked about when, doing processes and CRMs and data entry and stuff. Like a good CRM, you can log your emails in to every customer. So even if you forget to put these specific details into like the customer file in your TMS, like those conversations should be logged in detail in a CRM, not stored away in your inbox or a folder somewhere where they're going to get deleted once you get, your mailbox is out of control. So it's very important to be, detail oriented, especially in this, because we're facilitating stuff. We don't have a product
we deal in information
that we're selling. Right. Exactly.
So you should have all of it or you're not doing your job, right?
Yep, 100%.
Sweet, man. Got any fun plans for Father's Day?
My nephew's first birthday is Friday, so we're gonna go to Indianapolis and hang out with them, and then Father's Day. I'm not 100% sure what we're doing yet. I know we're staying there, um, probably till Sunday, but I'm crossing my fingers that there's a golf simulator in my future. But we'll see.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, yeah. In case the wife listens to this episode, I'm hoping
I'm
you
pulling
bought
for
me.
you.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. Well, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.